there.
No, honey. Mommy's not here.
I was happy. The happiest in the universe.
Hi there, everyone. Lars and Scott back for another review and analysis of Dandadan, this time for episode 7. Brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends.
So let me start out with this. I mean, and we're not even jumping into the recap quite yet. This is a very emotional episode, but also has a lot of very dark moments that we're going to be talking to. We're not going to outright state some of them just because of like YouTube's rules and just to be sensitive to people who are sensitive to these kind of topics. But just kind of a warning to anybody that's listening, we are going to be talking about people like unaliving themselves. We're going to be talking about like deep, dark activities that led to the events that happen in this story. But like with all the craziness and emotions that happen in this episode, this is probably one of the better episodes, like emotionally, of like this entire season probably. And like it reminds me kind of just the interest and the amount of like memes I've seen for it like online since this episode released. It kind of reminds me of what happened with episode 19 of Demon Slayer, when like you've got the crazy epic fight and everybody's freaking out about it, and that's when people really started jumping in on Demon Slayer because they started hearing so much about this really cool thing that happened. I think this is what episode 7 is going to do. It's going to bring more people into the story.
I really hope so, because this is, as you said, this is a very emotional episode. And this is an episode that does so many things really, really well from a writer's standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And we are, like, as you said, we're going to talk about some of these things. This isn't quite on the same level of intensity and uncomfortableness as the penultimate episode of Heavenly Delusion, its first season. Not quite on that same level, but it is but it shows topics that we do need to talk about. If we just simply gloss over them, then the impact that this episode has lessens, and it also kind of flies in the face of some of the things that the author really wanted to communicate, especially in terms of their characters and of the world that they inhabit. This isn't just something to shock people, have them have feels. This is very integral to these characters and to the events that are playing out.
Mm-hmm. So just kind of going into a recap what happened, because like previous episode we were left with like Momo, Ida, and Okarun. They'd basically been eaten by the Red Silky and just barely got thrown up. Red Silky's hair is all crazy, and they're basically getting ready for the comeback. And so you start the episode with like the comeback fight, and they're like doing their very best. Red Silky's just insane and continually getting worse, like mentally, as the fight goes. And
just tearing up the place too.
Yeah. And like Okarun's trying to protect Ida, Momo's trying to survive. They're doing their very best. And they finally get a moment where Okarun's able to just go all out and bash Red Silky and like completely knocks her out of the fight. And then they realize, basically because of Turbo Granny, they're like, oh crap, because of like our supernatural abilities, we survived getting swallowed by the ghost. Ida doesn't have any of these abilities, so she doesn't. And that's when you realize that like you thought the ghost had been defeated, but she shows back up and she's like, I can't let Ida die. I care too much about her. And even though up to that point it was driving her like insane, she like woke up from that insanity and she's like, I'm gonna sacrifice myself so Ida can live, because that's what a good mom does. And like really like kind of a gory little thing, because she like literally tears her jaw open just to prove the point that she won't try and eat them again. And it's just like she's dead serious about this. And like Okarun and Momo, they're like not sure about it, but they finally get convinced. It's like, okay, we'll try and do this. And what's involved is taking Red Silky's aura and transferring it to Ida. So Ida's aura will basically get like filled back to full, and so she can come back to life again. Well, in the process of transferring that aura, you get Red Silky's entire backstory in the most beautiful cinematography.
Cinematography.
Yeah.
In the bed in
cinematography.
Yeah, the cinematography is amazing.
And it's all like quiet. There's very few words spoken. The only words you do hear are like super emotional, and it ties into like why it was so important for Red Silky to get called mom. It basically tells this whole story about how Red Silky was this mother whose entire joy in life was just coming home, playing with her daughter, teaching her how to dance. And even though they didn't live in the best situation, and the mom was definitely struggling, especially with some like deep dark elements apparently tied in with the Japanese mafia. And if you read the manga, it explains a lot of this more. But for this situation, we don't need to know. We just need to know she's in a really bad situation. But what makes it better is her daughter. And then at the end, things fall apart. She's beaten up by the mafia. Her daughter's kidnapped. And like she desperately tries to run after him and save her daughter. And when she can't, she just can't handle it anymore. And
dances off a roof.
Yep, pretty much. Super duper sad. I don't get emotional in a lot of things. Just like my heart's been too damaged by living everyday life. This hurt. Like this had tears. Like it was genuinely sad. Anyway, and then you get to see this scene where you've got like little tiny girl Ida whose mom had just passed away, and she's having to have this talk with her dad, and she thinks she runs into her mom, which is the ghost of this woman, and she's like remembering her daughter and like kind of that vengeful spirit. Like you get to see how like these crazy powerful spirits are formed in the first place, but it's because of that emotion, it's because of that like tragedy that was involved that creates this really powerful spirit. But it was specifically tied with Ida because Ida interacted with the ghost when she was a child after her mother passed away. And just the super touching scene. And you get to see like Momo's like full on crying, Ida's crying, the ghost is crying, Okarun, just because he wasn't part of like the whole transfer, has no idea what's going on. And you find out that Red Silky, because she completely transferred her aura over, she's just gonna fade away to dust like she never existed. Like it's this super sad scene as she's like fading away, and Ida wakes up and like hugs her and calls her mom and just basically tells her that she accepts her. And it's just like the super touching, really beautiful done scene. Like this entire episode was just beautifully done. Like we had some great action scenes right at the start. It like led into like some more serious, like some real life consequences of like getting in a fight like that. And like, yeah, with all the crazy stuff, it's not a surprise somebody actually dies from it. But then like it leads into like a lot of really touching, very human emotions that this entire thing is based around.
Yeah. I did get very teary-eyed towards the end. Arya holding on to Red Silky, calling her mom, and accepting her, and giving this monster a chance to actually pass on and not just simply vanish completely was really great to see. And the last time that we talked about this show, we were talking about like how It's like, yes, Ira's going to get absolutely wasted by her shenanigans with the spirit world, and because she's such a fake and a phony, and she dared to abuse poor little Okaru's heart, even though his eyes are all on Momo. It's clear that she's not the greatest person, and yet by the end of this episode, she does something that is honestly very selfless. It's
Mm-hmm.
something very good, and it shows that there is a better person within her. And this ties into the flashback. Her father says, like, mommy's gone now. And she's like, well, I see her again. You will someday. You got to live really well, so that way you can greet her with a smile on your face. And the way that she'd been living up until this point probably was more fake rather than genuine. And as such, could she really genuinely greet her mother with a smile on her face? But here in this moment, accepting a mother figure who has gone through so much as Red Silky, this is a turning point for Ira to become that better person who can live in such a way that she can greet now not just one but two mothers with a smile on her face, and realizing that even though she didn't really have much time to spend with Red Silky, understanding this woman's backstory and the fact that she became what she did because she wanted to be a mother for Ira, that's something that she acknowledges, and rather than condemning her as a monster, or accepts it as something that's beautiful, which is not something that most people would be prepared to do. And that is a selfless action.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a great way of wrapping up the bully arc for Ira and potentially setting her up for even more stuff to come down the road. We'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I love how, like, we don't really see all that much of, like, Ida in the current time and place in this episode, but what we do see is 100% stronger than anything we got in the previous episodes, because, like, it is selfless. It is, like, strong, independent character, and, like, just to see her arc go from this, like, self-obsessed fool to, like, this awakening of, oh, like, there's stuff that actually means, like, with meaning around me going on, and I, like, can interact with it. It's so beautiful to see.
It really is. And before we really start diving a little bit more into the content of this episode, there's two things I quickly want to address as far as like formatting, as far as like creators go, as far as writers go. One of the
Mhm.
big things in this episode is that the pacing is
Mhm.
phenomenally well done. You have
Mhm.
the huge burst of action for about 8 to 9 minutes, and then half of the episode is the flashback, with then a very strong but very brief, in comparison to the other two acts, wrap up that isn't gratuitous, it isn't pandering, it stays on point to deliver what needs to be done. Where we get to see Ira revived, we get Momo crying over what's happening to Red Silky because it's absolutely unfair what's happening. Red Silky accepting her fate, Okaru wondering what the heck is going on, Turbo Granny running commentary while Ira then accepts her, and you then have that beautiful closing. That is incredibly done. That is so fast and
Mhm.
so good. And the other formatting thing that I do want to bring up is that for some people, I've seen this online where they've said, like, this episode feels like it came out of nowhere. Like, this doesn't fit in with all of the zaniness and funniness and all of the shipping and blah, 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 blah. Oh, it does. It comes back to the first episode. The first episode set the atmosphere completely for the show going forward. Lots of zaniness, lots of goofiness, tons of action, great characters, but that there are moments that will go dark.
Mhm.
That really questionable scene, that yes, there's plenty of people who didn't like it, and that's okay if you didn't like it, but that scene wasn't there to be gratuitous. That scene was there to herald to the audience, this is what you're getting yourself into. And a good writer lets the audience know. They don't play their whole hand immediately, but they tip it just enough to give their audience a feel for the ride that they're getting on.
Mm-hmm.
And and this episode delivers very well on the pacing and on the setup.
Right. And this is kind of a tangent, but I feel like it was the right move to make this very emotional, because like you've got these like dark things happening, and you're not just going to accept that that's happening and move on. You're like, no, we're going to dive into this and understand the actual emotions. We're going to get what these characters are feeling as they're going through it. And you don't need words for that. Like the whole Flashback almost had no words. It's just beautiful music and the interactions between the characters. And like, that's all we needed in this scene. But I feel like, especially here in the West, like dark things do happen. You just have to look up any number of the like true crime podcasts out there, and you'll find story after story after story of real life examples of the darkness that surrounds us. Yeah. But I feel like a lot of Western media, they'll like use those as examples, but a lot of Western media is also very episodic. So you get these like crime show dramas where, oh, we're going to solve who killed this person or who hurt that person kind of idea. But because it's a single episode and we're focused more on the characters that are solving the mystery, we're not focused as much into like the people, the victims that were like caught in this mess in the first place. And Dandadan just showed, no, you can and really should focus on who the victims are. You should really understand their emotions and what they went through, because it's their story. It's really their story. Like after they die and solving it, it's part of that story, but that's the end note. They're just figuring out what actually happened in order for justice to come around. But like the actual story is focused on what happened to the victim. And in this case, Red Silky, even though the previous episode we just saw her as this crazy ghost, now we're actually get to seeing why she became this crazy ghost. Mm-hmm. And it, like, all of her actions up to this point make so much more sense up to this point.
Yes. And to build on that, as far as the emotion goes, I've seen a lot of people online complaining that the manga did this better. And Scott and I have talked about it earlier, and we agreed that we believe that the anime did it better. The manga gives you more context and more information, but by really extending this flashback and making it something that's seen through visuals and through music, you get that emotional connection. And even though I had read this chapter and knew what was coming, I was so caught up in the beauty and the tragedy of this mother who's sacrificing so much to help out her daughter, to give her daughter the best life that she possibly can. That's a great mom. I was so swept up in that it completely blindsided me, despite knowing what was going to happen. I was still blindsided by the ultimate tragic turn of her daughter's kidnapping, her completely losing hope, and then dancing off of a building in farewell. And that just hits so dang well. I remember reading the manga and being like, wow, that's tragic. And this time I was all like, that's tragic. Mm-hmm. And like, it lingers. And as Scott has said, like the community has just made so many memes. There's so many discussions. This is branching way beyond the usual Dandadan viewers. And that is the power of a great emotional story. You could throw that segment at anyone without the Dandadan context, and people will recognize what's going on and will feel the emotions of it without being overburdened by, and here's the context, and here's the clues, and here's the blah, 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 blah. Now let's get back to the action. So that way the Red Silky arc can be resolved, because we have more shenanigans to get to.
I mean, and there's always going to be time for more shenanigans, but the fact that they, like, pacing wise, the story's been so fast paced up to this point, and then they take half of the episode to focus on this brilliant emotional set piece. Like, it really shows that the writers are there to like tell the right stories here. They're not just worried about getting to a certain point in the manga with the series. They're actually willing to take the time to do this right, and it's beautifully done. It is absolutely phenomenally done.
And it's not only beautifully done, it's done in a very mature way. So again, coming back to that, the manga gives you far more context for what's happening, spells out some of the scenes, whereas the way that Science Saru has decided to portray this flashback, it's all based on what you can view, what you can pick up, and if you're paying attention, you realize the situation that the mother finds herself in, that it's far more complex, far more dark, and that she makes the very conscious decision to take the risk because she wants to do something wonderful and good for her daughter, which though leads to the tragic consequences of the Yakuza showing up, taking retribution, and then taking what they believe is owed them. And there people were complaining, like, why didn't it tell me? Why didn't it tell me? And here in the West, we've gotten so used now to shows stopping the story to give us stupid stuff like sexplanations. Oh, I need to explain things, but I'm going to make it really spicy. Or now that this horrible thing has happened, let's spend 10 to 15 minutes talking about it in hallways or talking about it at the local coffee store. This isn't a sitcom, so you're not supposed to have that, and there's no laugh track either. This is a very serious moment that rather than being slapped in the face with a whole bunch of information, you're being treated like a proper, mature audience viewer. And if you're not necessarily mature enough or well enough informed with the clues that pointing to the Yakuza, then you are innocently unaware, you're ignorant of what's happening until the horrible thing happens, and then it makes sense in retrospect. Either way, it works, and the show is expecting you to feel what is happening, to piece it all together. So that way, when the ending happens, in those 3 minutes, the 3 minutes that are left over can be used to deliver the amazing finale rather than explaining it to you. And that's really good. That's good storytelling.
Yeah. I really like how they're taking the time. Like, you don't have to know all of the information. You just need to know enough information from everything that's going on to tie in to, like, the emotions that happen. And you have to have both. Like, you get a story where you're trying too hard to just express the emotions without anything to ground people in. It's not going to lodge into people's hearts. It makes me think of, there's this anime movie called Children of the Sea, where, like, literally the director shows up on screen before the movie starts, and he's like, I really want you to focus on the emotions. Nothing else matters, just the emotions. And I lost some of my interest watching that movie just because of that, because I'm like, no, but I want actual story in this as well. I want to be able to care about these characters, not just the, like, emotions that, like, this is supposed to bring forward. And I feel like this has everything it needs to be brilliant, and it really is. I feel like I have one thing I'm upset about with this episode, and there's only one thing. And you get to the ending, it's brilliant. I'm, like, crying, like, so emotionally overcome by this. And then it flips into the goofy ending scene with Turbo Granny, like, playing with all the like, new technology and goofy stuff that the ending has. And I'm like, this is time you change the ending to something more, like, solemn and thought-provoking, because people would be so shocked by what's going on, they would just let the entire ending play. They wouldn't even care, because they're like still trying to process what's going on. And that's my only thing I would change about this episode is just change the ending a little bit. You don't need to have like change the music, have something calmer. You don't even have to like animate it all that crazy, but just have something more conducive to that emotional state you left everybody in.
You don't see it done so much anymore, and if it is done, it's usually done more for comedic effect than anything. But like how in the 90s, as a way of trying to like save money on animation, they'd have like those really dramatic or emotional scenes that would be captured in a gorgeous painting, and the camera would like either zoom in or zoom out on it as the music plays, and that could take up like 15-20 seconds. Like that would be a way of like sear this into your mind. Ira hugging Red Silky. Because
exactly.
that is the climax, and you want that in your head.
As a writer myself, I really feel like this episode is a brilliant way to look at like the classic like writer's adage, show don't tell, because like we could have earlier in the show had Granny Seiko tell us how these ghosts are formed, how these vengeful spirits are formed. Instead, we are like through the entirely emotional scene that's going on, we're feeling the emotions that like Red Silky is going through as she morphs into this like crazy vengeful spirit. And it's beautiful storytelling. It's beautiful world building. We're not getting somebody sitting around and talking and explaining how something works. It's not freaking Supernatural, like the show Supernatural, where like they'd stop and talk it out and explain why this person is so bad or why like how these monsters are formed. No, we're shown exactly how this is formed, and we understand on an emotional level why that happened. And it's done. It's done so beautifully, so well. Like props to Science Sorrow. They did some great work with this episode, like in so many different ways. And this is one of those like episodes that like people will remember. Like you think of the like academic festival in My Hero Academia, people are still freaking out about over that fight between Deku and
Todoroki.
Yeah. Or like the Demon Slayer episode 19, the fight against the spider demon, et cetera, et cetera. Like people remember those episodes because of how well animated and how the story made them feel. This is going to be another one of those episodes.
I really do hope so, because Dandadan is a great story, and I mean this episode alone is just fantastic. But like in terms of also how well this lands. So the individual story of Red Silky is perfect. It's like a great standalone story, kind of like reading the Dog and the Dragon in Rhythm of War, which if you like, you could cut out the rest of the book and just have that story, and that story alone will bring you to tears. But in order to have like the true catharsis that comes with that, you have to know the story of Kaladin in order to understand why he's being told this story and the meaning that that story will have for him going forward. It's the same right here with Red Silky. Her backstory is great. It's a great standalone story on its own. You don't need Dandadan for it to be emotional. But if you want it to be as powerful as it is, you need to have seen Dandadan. You need to have seen Ira tease Okaroon. You need to see how Momo reacts and gets her little petty, but though well-deserved revenge. How that then prompts Ira to then try to get her revenge on Momo. What this does to Okaroon, the tensions at school, why they need to even find the golden ball and all of that, which then leads to just how powerful that ending is, because this is a moment that doesn't exist in a bubble or in a void. This is a moment that comes into being because of the characters not just simply following what the plot tells them to It's characters living their lives within the plots. And that is really what makes this land so well.
Yes. Beautifully said. Thank you, Lars.
You're welcome. So, with that being said, if you haven't yet watched Dandadan and you've watched us this entire time, thank you so much. But if you have seen this episode of Dandadan, we'd love to hear what your thoughts are, because this is a very powerful, very impactful episode. There's going to be loads of different opinions flying around. We want to hear yours. And if you're looking for more reviews, analyses, recommendations for other stories and the likes, please check out our other videos here on our channel. If you'd like to, subscribe. We'd love to have you come along for the adventure. And if you'd like to support the work that we do, please check out the books that we've published. Links for them are in the description below. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us for this particular video. And until the next one, y'all, choose.
Okini.
If that's the best you can do to her with my power, it's damn disappointing.